Hello, hi, welcome to Liverpool Online Music and today's episode of It's Only Music, Isn't It? Today I'm here, me, Liam Boom, with Phil Beale.
Hey, good to see you
Yeah,
again.
it's all right, isn't it? We were having a conversation outside this room in the staff room. Well, I call it the staff room. It's an old telephone box with two buckets to sit on. But anyway, we were having a conversation. It almost turned into a bit of a dispute, really, because we were talking about copying, cheating, plagiarism, stealing and everything in popular music. And I was saying, well, isn't it just all about...
Isn't it just music?
Recycling, it's all music, just recycle a bit here and there. But actually, Phil came up with some really good stuff that I did not know about.
Right, yeah. Yeah, it was all about the origins, really, and the origins of the popular music or the music became popular. And I've always been very conscious of the fact that some of those people that originated it were never credited with that, you know, not in any sense, not in terms of recognition, or more to the point, in terms of any remuneration, you know.
Sure.
So it's quite a serious subject, really. So, for example, if you hear a very famous track, let's think of a famous track. How about "Whole Lot of Love"? Remember that?
Oh, yeah, I know that. I know it. Yeah.
Well, that was lifted pretty much wholesale from a track called "You Need Love" by a black guy, a former sharecropper, a fairly impoverished guy called Willie Dixon, and
Okay.
he wrote the riff and he wrote most of the lyrics. So Led Zeppelin would be told by their record company, no, you don't do that. What you do is you put traditional, arranged by
Right.
Robert Plant, Jimmy Page, John Bonham, John Paul Jones, and that way the record company gets away from having to give any credit or remuneration to the originator.
So the guy, what did you say the guy's name was? Billy Dixon? Willie Dixon. Are you saying that it was his song originally, and without him, any of his knowledge or anything, it was ripped off and taken and presented as Zeppelin's own?
Well, it was radically different.
Sure.
Got to give them that, you know, their dues. And I'm not accusing those artists themselves of intentionally ripping anybody off, but their inspiration was from his recordings, without a doubt. And there's lots of others, Howlin' Wolf and loads of other, particularly black blues artists of the 30s, 40s, 50s. That they loved and appreciated, and they then created this music, which was massively based on that work.
So the music they were, well, I say recycling. Okay, maybe in some cases you could use the term ripped off. So that music, had that music already been kind of out there and was in the public domain and being listened to by lots of people in its original form by the original black musicians?
Not outside of the black community, really, no.
Right.
And in fact, not outside the American black community primarily. So that's where it was originally released. But there's other examples. I mean, the Stones are another blues-based white British band, obviously. And again, they covered Robert Johnson's songs left, right and centre. But again, on the label in 1969, it said traditional, arranged by Jagger Richards, you know. And again, it's not Mick Jagger's fault or Keith Richards' fault necessarily, but it's the record companies thinking, oh, we don't want to give any credit out there, we'll just say it's a traditional blues, which it was recorded in the 20s probably.
So I'm getting a bit confused here. I'm thinking of, Jagger and Richards, the Rolling Stones. But then you're introducing this idea that there's maybe a third party that might be like an agent or a manager or the recording company.
Yeah.
And it sounds a little bit, based on what you're telling me, that there's a little bit of kind of, I don't know, something going on, a bit untoward there, a bit dodgy, a bit evil, that is drawing Jagger and Richards in, for example, drawing them in a kind of a naive kind of way.
Yeah.
So, okay, if there's a bad dude in all of this, who is that bad dude?
It's always the businessman, isn't it? It's always the business. It's never about the artists themselves.
Okay.
I mean, there's a great tale about the artists that we talked about, the Rolling Stones going over to the States to record down in the southern part of America. I think it was a Memphis studio. I'm pretty sure it was a Memphis studio. And the legend is that Muddy Waters, one of their idols as a musician was sweeping the floor and painting the walls in this studio. That's the only work he could get.
Yeah.
But we mustn't lose sight of the fact that the guys that revived that music by putting fresh modern impetus into it, they actually did a great favour to a lot of these artists who could then come across to the UK. They couldn't get arrested in America. There was the racial aspect to it, which was huge. It was known as race music anyway over there at that time. But they could come over to the UK, and they could go on tour in the UK, and they could make the money they always dreamed of making, you know, and find the appreciation and the recognition that they felt they deserved, you know. But so no, it's always about the business aspect. It's always about the record company trying to get away with as many cost savings as they can do.
And is it a generalisation, or is it fairly accurate to say that most of, you know, what we're talking about here was essentially, you know, white musicians and white production companies, etc., ripping off music that was originally black music? Is that what we're saying?
I would say it's a bit more nuanced than that. Okay. I would say that the artists themselves loved the music so much they wanted to recreate it, and you could call it recycle it if you like, cover it, and had no intention of ripping anybody off at all.
Okay.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It was them showing their appreciation for that type of music, which was not that well known, and in fact started to come into the UK with sailors into Liverpool, initially and primarily.
Right.
You couldn't even buy it over in the UK in the early 60s.
Right, sure.
But that changed as its popularity increased, and it became more generally available. But that's right. It's not about the artists. I'm not blaming them at all.
Sure.
But it's all about business, and cynical business at that.
Right. Okay. So would it be a bit naive of me to ask the question that once the music companies and producers, etc., worked out this great music was happening in the black community, why didn't they just go to the black community and record the black musicians? Why did they then pass the music on to white musicians?
Good question. I think that the music we're talking about was popular within the black community in the States, as I say. Known as race music, and restricted to certain radio stations, to that community in lots of ways commercially, I guess. Yeah. But made its way over here on import or via sailors buying it over in the States and coming back over into the UK and bringing it over that way, and launching things like the skiffle boom initially. Right. So skiffle music was all three chords and some attitude,
Okay, yeah.
And that was all based on black folk music.
Yeah.
And it all developed from there, really.
Okay.
So I'm not sure about the answer to the question in terms of you asking me, well, why didn't record companies go over to the States and bring the black artists over? I don't know the answer to that question.
Right. Okay, then. So I'm getting a sort of a better kind of picture of what's going on. Okay, so this the music we're calling the original black music, if you like, made its way to this country, maybe on vinyl, and as you said, people who travelled backwards and forwards between the UK and America would bring some, what they used to call the Cunard Yanks.
They call them the Cunard Yanks.
So they're sailors and that.
That's right.
So they're bringing back a record, and no one's ever heard of this guy on the record, but they play it and it's really cool. Yeah. And next thing you know, there's people sitting around the living room with guitars trying to impersonate it, but they're adding a bit to it and it sounds great, and the producer thinks, God, that would work.
Yeah. Yeah.
So it sounds all a bit kind of innocent and naive.
I think that's true.
Yeah, but a bit of me is still thinking, hang on, was there some actual, ripping off or cheating going on? And if there was, it might have been when the record companies themselves started getting the pocket calculators out and doing a bit of working out and thinking, okay, if we tweak this, we tweak that, whatever, and we get some young white men to perform it, etc., there's a chance of selling it.
Absolutely. Have you ever heard of Rock Island Line?
Oh, yeah, by Lonnie Donegan.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Massive hit. A skiffle standard, yeah?
Yes.
Leadbelly wrote that song.
Oh, right, okay.
So he was an American convict back in the States, in the southern states, in and out of prison. again, could get arrested.
Sure.
But wrote some amazing songs, and that's where Rock Island Line came from.
Yeah.
Was from Leadbelly. So the same principle again, but this guy called Lonnie Donegan, who apparently I think he was part of a big band at some point.
Yes, yeah, he was.
And then they gave him his own little sort of slot in the intermission.
Right.
And he created this, or started recreating these songs he'd heard.
Right.
One of which was Rock On.
Right.
Line.
Okay.
Does your chewing gum lose its flipping flavour?
You were on the bedpost overnight. Yeah.
But it had a rhythm and an attack, and it was easy to play. And teenagers picked up on it immediately because they figured out, again, like I say, with 3 chords, you could reproduce this. So all of a sudden, thousands of skiffle bands are generated by this type of music. It's the first punk explosion of do-it-yourself music. With washboards.
Yeah, the old washboards.
What do they call the bass thing?
The T-chest bass. T-chest bass. Yeah, love that.
And maybe 1 or 2 guitars or a banjo.
Yeah.
Do-it-yourself music. But you can thank people like Leadbelly and those artists for actually writing the tunes in the first place. And did they get credited? No, they didn't.
No. Okay, so what I'm trying to work out, my motto is, it's all just music, isn't it? And as long as it works for your ears, that's the long and short of it for me. I'm not really bothered. But you brought some interesting stuff up here. So what I'm trying to work out now is, what is this a story of? Okay, it's a story about the evolution of popular music to some degree. And we're going to touch upon that decade by decade in our future podcasts and so on.
Absolutely.
But what is it a story of? It's not just simply a story of that happened, then this happened, then that happened. Is it, for example, is it a story about social, racial injustice? I mean, how much of this story is political? Because I'm getting this vision in my mind now of this dead, poor black guy, maybe with no shoes, sitting on a porch somewhere with a battered guitar, singing this song, and he hasn't got 2 beans to rub together. And somehow miles away in London, there's a band playing in the club, and then they're getting paid 50 quid each a night, in the 60s, for just kind of jamming up his stuff a bit. So am I sort of overreading it here? And am I getting too serious? Is it serious? And is it about injustice, or is it just a story of what happened?
I think it's another example of blaxploitation, quite honestly. I really do. But I think that picture that we've both probably created there is a little too simplistic.
Right.
I think that a lot of the sharecroppers and farm workers and cotton pickers who started to create those work songs, say back in the 10s and 20s, 1910s, 1920s, they were skillful musicians, they were creatives. So they actually would create a career for themselves over and above having to pick cotton, which was a hellish way to earn a pittance, in terms of earnings. They would rise above that in their own community. They would probably progress actually to out of the Mississippi Delta, where it mainly began, into the cities, up to Memphis and to Chicago and places like that, and electrify and become gigging musicians. So they would have a career from it. But the scale, the way that it was upscaled by young British kids picking up on it and then taking it global, that's the point where I think it broke at that point. A lot of those guys were left in the bars in Chicago or Memphis getting no credit for the work they'd created.
Okay, so how bad is that, or how typical is that of the kind of industry that the music industry is?
I think it's I wouldn't call it typical necessarily. I mean, I think the inheritance thing is what happens at every level and every decade. Every decade influences the next decade, and a new version of it will branch off and might become more popular or might not. But that's I think a natural process. Of course, it is, and goes way back to way beyond the times we're talking about. But I think that the exploitation of those people is pretty unique to this era, I think. I don't know of any other era when a group of musicians has been exploited in that way.
Right.
And I think it's a very, I think it's probably an American thing.
Yeah.
And it's definitely it's a racial divide thing. I think that's going on.
Sure. Okay then. Okay, you've told me a lot of stuff that I didn't know, and I just like to listen to the music and listen to all kinds of music, and I don't necessarily always know, what's in the background or the history of that music. And it is interesting, especially when you've mentioned a few examples, and you played me a few samples of two songs that are so similar that I've obviously recognised.
Sure.
They've got the same origins and so on and so forth.
Sure, yeah.
And we've talked about how whether or not, there's kind of a wicked evil rip-off going on, or whether there's some natural kind of recycling that goes on in music and the arts. And what I'm saying now is that, okay, fair enough, it is the case that a lot of people did get ripped off, and loads of people especially did not get credited.
That's the point.
For what they did. Okay, so is there a way now, or is it just too late, or is there a way now of kind of redressing that somehow?
It's been redressed.
Okay,
it's actually been redressed.
Oh, right, okay.
Yeah. So if you bought a copy of Led Zeppelin 2 in 1969, then all of the credits would be the band members.
Right.
Or maybe a traditional arranged by band members.
Yeah.
If you buy it now, it'll credit Willie Dixon.
Okay.
So it's a valid discussion because it has been corrected. So Willie Dixon's estate now does get the credit from Led Zeppelin's sales, but
fantastic.
Back in 1969 it didn't, and it took a lot of activation. A lot of people.
And is this a voluntary thing, by the way? Is the industry doing this voluntarily? They haven't been told.
No, it was forced to do it.
Oh, by law, they've got to do it.
Yeah.
And Dixon's estate get some payments now.
Yes,
right.
They do get royalties now from the sales. Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, long time coming, but it looks like it's starting to straighten itself out. But as far as I'm concerned, the music still sounds the same. But I don't know. Maybe next time I listen to that music, I might be thinking,
where does it come from?
Where does it come from? Or did anyone get ripped off?
Yeah, absolutely.
I just wanted to say, by the way, we were having a conversation before about some of our future podcasts. And we're going to be having a look at how music developed over the decades, maybe starting from the 1920s, and looking at how the recording industry and recording technology.
Absolutely.
And I believe in one of our podcasts, we're going to persuade you, or I think Phil's going to persuade me, that there's a link between Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers in a 1930s musical, kicking the shoes off in a hotel room, putting a record on, dancing to it. He's going to tell me that's got a direct link with young people on TikTok,
the TikTok generation,
dancing around in their bedrooms to modern music, and it's all more or less the same thing. And
Absolutely.
I'm thinking, wait a minute, that's so far apart, the 1920s and the 2020s. But through our next 9 podcasts, I think,
indeed,
or 10,
yeah,
we're going to go through decade by decade. And
yeah.
I believe, because Phil's persuaded me to change my mind just today in just the last 20 minutes. So I've got no chance, have I, after 10 podcasts? Anyway, sum it up, Phil. Last sentence or two from you before we all...
Yeah, I think it would be a great idea to play out with maybe an example of what we're talking about. Play out with Rock Island Line by the wonderful Leadbelly. How about that?
Fantastic. And do we get to dance on this table too?
I don't think so.
That's not allowed? Health and safety. Okay, well, this has been Liverpool Online Music, and this podcast is called It's All Just Music, isn't it? Which it is, there's nothing there. We're saying ta-ra for now, but we'll see you next week.
Yeah, cheers, Liam.
Ta-ra for now.
Good stuff. Cheers.